I'm Tina from Interrelation.com. This video is about the tragic meeting of two pandemics. First, let me give you an outline of what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'll begin with 4 stories of people I know, meaning of the word pandemic. Then we'll talk about what the other pandemic is, obesity and metabolic syndrome. What are the medical conditions that have bad outcomes for COVID? So some people got it, some people didn't even know they got it, some people didn't have any effect until they tested positive, but it really didn't affect them much. Some people had some problem and some suffered a lot, some died. What is the difference between these people? The medical conditions that are the connection between bad outcomes for COVID and metabolic syndrome. And is there a root cause underlying these medical conditions? Is there a solution? Is there a possibility to delay death, as it were, to postpone death? Is there a possibility for a man to die at 70 instead of 50 and spend a solid 20 years more with his family? Is there a possibility that a man who dies at 70 could probably die at 90 or 100 and contribute more to society and see his children and great-grandchildren getting married and having a life of their own? Is there a possibility for a better quality of life, to add more quality to these extra years that one may get? Is there a possibility to not have chronic medication one after the other and an increase in medication? Is there a possibility of not having to die of chronic disease? After all this, we will chat with Dr. Ellis Vivian, who will go on to explain to us how we can measure our metabolic health. We'll ask him what it means to be healthy, and we'll ask him what tests should we take to find out if we are in good health. We'll also ask him how we can improve our health. So stay till the end of the video and we'll get the doctor's expert advice about tests for metabolic health and steps to improve our metabolic health. So these are the things we'll discuss in the video. Let's get into it. But before I start, who am I? I'm a common man looking for answers. If you see our website, IndianLCHF.com, and our YouTube channel, Indian LCHF, you will see many of the videos, especially the video an LCHF story, part 1 and part 2, and our podcast episodes will give you an idea of who I am and how all of this started. I'm a common man. I look for answers. I search for answers. And when I find them, I share them with the whole wide world. For this video, I've given links to the sources in the show notes or the YouTube description. Go check them out if you would like to know more. Let me tell you the 4 stories of the people I know. They are stories of death. They are sad. And in these COVID times, it is impossible to not talk about death. One of them is a friend of ours for about 15 years. He was an overweight person with a large tummy. He tried his best to reduce his weight. Around 3 years ago, we met him in front of a shop, and we were meeting him after a long time. I saw him and I was shocked that he had put on even more weight. So I told him about LCHF. He already knew about LCHF because he'd seen some of my videos and checked out the website. So he knew about it. So I insisted to him, saying, why don't you do this? You can reduce weight easily. You'll become a healthier person. I had the liberty to say that to him. We were quite close friends. And I told him, and he said, yeah, I know about it. But, I'm cycling a lot now. And he was like cycling 100 kilometers, but was managing to lose only, around 5 kilos or so. And then he would put it back on, and then he would lose it. He would put it back on. It was a big yo-yo. So I told him, try this out. It will help you. It's good for you for the long term, not just to lose weight now. But it's for a healthy future. And I also told him that it would be helpful for his wife because they wanted a child and they were trying to conceive. Anyway, after that, we didn't meet him at all. A few months ago, we heard that he had contracted COVID. We were worried for him. We were concerned about his health. We were hoping he would recover. He had a relative who was a doctor who we also knew, and they were also quite concerned because he was an obese person. And he hung on for a few days, but sadly, he passed away. He did a lot of social work. He was a good man who did a lot of good things. 50 was not the age to die. He died way too early. He should have lived another 50 years and had a family and children and grandchildren. But sadly, he passed away too early. This is about an acquaintance of ours. He is known by his circle of friends to be quite obese. And as far as I knew him, I've always seen him as an obese person. He's a good man. He did a lot of good work, social work, especially among children. When we started the channel IndianLCHF.com, he had sent us a mail asking if we could help him. I was a novice at that time, so I had replied saying, I don't know how I can help you, but I'm happy to help you. Do let me know in what way I can help. And then I received no reply from him, and then life moved on. Then around 2 years ago, he contacted us again and said, could we please help him reduce weight? So we had a long conversation in which I explained to him and his family about LCHF, about the concept behind it, and about the practical ways in which food preparation can be done and how to monitor your progress, the tests to take, and all of that. And he followed it for some time and reported to us that he felt good, that he felt so much better in just a matter of weeks, that when he was walking, he was no longer breathless. He felt better, he felt good, and he was losing the extra kilograms. Then he went quiet for some time, and then after a couple of weeks, he told us that he had been to see the doctor, and the doctor had apparently told him that, but LCHF is a bit extreme, so why don't you cut that down a bit and become moderate and try to reduce your weight anyway. And even though we had discussed with him a lot that there is no moderate, it's either low carb, high fat, or it's not low carb, high fat. There's nothing called a moderate low carb, high fat, because beyond a certain number of carbohydrates, you're going to have a lot of insulin secretion and put on weight. And this is different for a normal person, but for a person who's already overweight or obese, we have to take the right measures and go really low carbohydrate, high fat if we want to lose a lot of weight. And this whole eat everything in moderation, eat less, exercise more, calorie balancing has not worked. You can see this in our other videos about calories, that it has not worked for the past 50 years, and the reason why it has not worked. Anyway, we didn't hear from him after that. And then a year later, a couple of months into the COVID pandemic, we heard that he had contracted COVID and was admitted in one of the premier hospitals in India. We hoped and prayed that he would somehow come out of it, and we could discuss LCHF again with him so that he could then better his health and live longer. But sadly, he too passed away. It was tragic that he died. He had just turned 50 a year or so before his death. He should have lived for at least 100 or 120 years. He could have done so much more work had he lived for more years. It's tragic and sad that he passed away at a much earlier and younger age. A couple of months into the pandemic, in 2020, after the lockdown, the husband of a friend of mine passed away. He did not have COVID. He passed away from a sudden heart attack. She told me that he didn't have any heart problems, or at least it wasn't diagnosed. All he had was blood pressure, and he was taking medications for that, with no diabetes, no other complications, non-drinker, non-smoker. He was not obese. He was not even what you would call overweight. He was fairly normal, a slight tummy. You wouldn't really expect him to suddenly die of a heart attack, just like that. He died leaving behind a wife and a teenage child. Not the age to die at all. He was also less than 50. Several weeks ago, I saw a notification on Facebook. It was about the death of a childhood friend of mine. He was probably a couple of years younger than me. We became friends when he relocated to our neighborhood. When he was around 9 or 10 years, I was around 11 or 12. He had just lost a parent. He was kind of socially awkward, and I kind of took him under my wing, and we were friends. He used to visit home, used to feel at home with us. And a couple of my friends and him were friends. My parents knew him well. His parents knew me. As long as I was in my hometown, we remained friends. He used to visit me and we used to hang about. Then I left my hometown and we lost touch for some time. Then we got in touch through social media and we used to have the occasional chat and we used to send each other messages. Then he got married and had a child. We used to send each other yearly greetings and so on. And then for the past 3 or 4 years, I lost touch with him. I used to see him on Facebook occasionally. And then suddenly this notification of his death shocked me. The boy was younger than I am. And he's left behind his wife and young son. He's just about 40. He died of a sudden heart attack. And he was also not obese, not even overweight. You wouldn't look at him twice in the street and think, okay, he's overweight. No, he looked normal, just a slight paunch and slightly heavier than what he used to be when we were friends. I met him last about 15 years ago, and he had put on a few kilos. Bigger cheeks, puffy eyes, but really not an overweight person. And when I heard that he suddenly died of a heart attack, I felt very sad. I'd written a blog about this around 3 years ago, about people dying, young people dying of sudden heart attacks and undiagnosed heart disease. David Bobbitt, in the movie The Widowmaker, he says, the first time you know you have the disease, you're dead. That is what heart disease and heart attack has become. Why have we spoken about these stories? Did these people have to die this early? Could their death have been delayed? Could they have lived longer? Maybe yes. Maybe they could have lived longer. Maybe they could have had a longer and healthier life. And that is why I'm making this video. That is why I hope to bring this message, a wake-up call, to improve our health and to ensure that we could probably live longer lives, not die, leaving behind our loved ones. And not just longer lives, but that we could have a better quality of life and dedicate our time not to sickness and chronic illnesses and medications, but that we could dedicate our times to our families, our society, and do something positive for the world we live in. Okay, coming back to the pandemic, let's look at what the words pandemic, endemic, epidemic, all these mean. According to dictionary definitions, epidemic means affecting many persons at the same time and spreading from person to person in a locality. Now, this becomes a pandemic when when an epidemic spreads across several countries and many parts of the world. What is an endemic? An endemic is contained within a region. For example, malaria is said to be endemic to tropical regions. It continues to persist. It's not going away. It becomes part of the society and the lifestyle, and it may become seasonal and recurs a couple of seasons a year, or maybe one season every year. The WHO changed the definition of the word pandemic in 2007-2008. Previously, it had to cause massive impact in mortality and morbidity, but now the definition is just that it is widespread. Let us now look at COVID-19 pandemic. We've heard the term comorbidities. What are the comorbidities of COVID pandemic? Obesity, hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, and old age. And old age is only because people just become less healthier as they get older. Now, some experts say that a healthy 70-year-old is at a lesser risk of disease from COVID than an unhealthy 40-year-old, which is probably the reason why there have been very bad outcomes for some younger people with COVID-19, including death. So you hear news about somebody being just 35 or 40 and dying of the COVID pandemic. This is the reason. Research says that in the MERS COVID outbreak, age, male gender, and cardiometabolic conditions, including hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and obesity, proved to be independent risk factors for severe illnesses, including death, similar to the current COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, in the 2009 influenza A H1N1 pandemic, obesity was a significant risk factor for severe illness and mortality, with 1/3, that's 33%, of individuals requiring ICU were patients with obesity. The Spanish influenza of 1918, SARS 2003, H1N1 2009 onwards, in all these influenza epidemics and pandemics, malnutrition and obesity were associated with severe disease and complications and hospitalization and need for intensive care unit and even mortality. Data about COVID-19 says 89% of the people who were hospitalized had one of these pre-existing conditions. 96.1% of them had at least one comorbidity. The average person had 3 diseases. 66% of the deaths were people with hypertension, 30% of the deaths were type 2 diabetes, 27% of deaths were heart disease. There was a high probability that smokers also had bad outcomes, including death for COVID-19. Let us look at obesity and COVID-19. This is not to make obese people feel bad or anything like this. I've spoken a video about how obesity is not a character flaw or a discipline problem. It's a hormonal imbalance. It's a symptom of poor health, which we need to address. Research says that obesity favors mechanisms that apply both to innate immunity and adaptive immunity in the development of infection, which might partly explain why patients with obesity are more prone to suffer from respiratory infections in the context of COVID-19. Obesity is a state of chronic low-grade inflammation and defective immunity. See, COVID-19 is a virus. It needs a host, and obese patients host it for a longer time in their body. And because of their increased ventilation volume, viral load is more. There is a possibility that they may spread it more. Compromised immunity in obese patients allows replication or mutation of the virus. Adipose tissues, that is fat tissues, also act as a reservoir for the virus. Intubation may be difficult in obese patients because of accumulation of fat tissue in the throat, in the larynx. Obese people also have poor skin integrity and skin deterioration. So people with obesity and diabetes have poor skin healing. It takes longer time to heal, and there is a higher vulnerability to infection. Obese people are also leptin resistant. Leptin resistance compromises defense to infection and increases susceptibility to respiratory infections. Fat depositions in the tongue lead to risk of sleep apnea, which increases 5 times and probably necessitates admission in an ICU. Post-vaccination for influenza, subjects with obesity show lower antibody levels compared to lean subjects, and they have a weaker influenza-specific T cell function. They show a 2 to 3-fold higher incidence of influenza even after having been vaccinated. Influenza-like illnesses, namely bronchitis, pneumonia, pharyngitis, laryngitis, rhinitis, and sinusitis, prove to occur more frequently in subjects with obesity. And this is not just for people with visible obesity. Some of these problems happen even with people who are TOFI, TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. I've spoken about this in a video about fasting. Many of these complications also arise with people with other comorbidities, not just obesity. Research says that insulin resistance, not fat mass, is key to the link between obesity and poor COVID-19 outcomes. I've given links to all these researches and reports in the show notes or the description of the video. Please go and check them out. We saw in the definition about epidemic and pandemic how many people get a physical medical problem at the same time. And obesity, therefore, can be classified as an epidemic or a pandemic because it's all over the world. And though it doesn't literally spread, by contagion from one person to another, we see how it is so widespread across the whole world and is the cause of many premature deaths and ill health. Let us look at this map about obesity. Obesity is one of the leading factors of early death. It is responsible for 4.7 million premature deaths each year. Now, is there a link between these two pandemics, between obesity on the one hand and COVID-19 on the other hand? To look at this, let us go into what are the comorbidities of COVID-19. What is the meaning of the word comorbidity? It means more than one medical condition or disease at the same time. Multimorbidity means more than 2 illnesses or diseases occurring in the same person at the same time. And mostly these co or multimorbidities interact with each other. So the comorbidities of COVID-19 are obesity, hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, and old age. Comorbidities means that the risk of severe illness or death due to a COVID-19 infection is high for people with these problems. What is now widely referred to as comorbidities of COVID-19 was termed as metabolic syndrome ever since the 1950s, and it became popular in the 1970s. In 1947, French physician Dr. Jean Vague observed upper body obesity, and it seemed to be associated with an increased risk for conditions like atherosclerosis, diabetes, kidney stones, and gout. The term metabolic syndrome was used in 1977 by Herman Holler in reference to the associations between obesity, diabetes mellitus, high blood lipids, which is basically high levels of lipids, cholesterol in the blood, high uric acid level, and hepatic steatosis, fatty liver, and how the combined presence of these factors increased the risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Dr. Singer used the term to describe the associations between hyperlipoproteinemia, which is high cholesterol, and obesity, gout, diabetes mellitus, and hypertension. In 1988, Dr. Gerald Reaven hypothesized that insulin resistance could be the underlying factor linking this constellation of abnormalities, which he then named Syndrome X. There are various names for this, obesity, hypertension, glucose intolerance, hyperinsulinemia, and a high level of triglycerides and cholesterols. There are many researchers and there are many names also. The names are metabolic syndrome X, cardiometabolic syndrome, insulin resistance syndrome, also Reaven's syndrome. Now, if metabolic syndrome goes untreated, it could lead to severe diabetes, heart attack, stroke, kidney disease, eye problems, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease. Definition of metabolic syndrome by the American Heart Association is abdominal obesity, that is obesity around the abdomen, around the mid-waist, atherogenic dyslipidemia, raised blood pressure, insulin resistance or glucose intolerance, prothrombotic state, that's an increased risk for blood clots, pro-inflammatory state, conducive to chronic inflammation, inflamed adipose tissue, that is fat tissue, characterized by increased monocyte infiltration and cytokine production. These terms are relating to immunity, which we'll see later on. All these have been associated with metabolic syndrome. NIH states that people who have metabolic syndrome often also have two other conditions: constant low-grade inflammation throughout the body and excessive blood clotting. Some other conditions that are also associated with metabolic syndrome are a fatty liver, which is excess triglycerides and other fats in the liver; polycystic ovarian syndrome, a tendency to develop cysts on the ovaries; gallstones; breathing problems during sleep, called sleep apnea. So summarizing these, we see that the conditions associated with metabolic syndrome are type 2 diabetes, strokes, peripheral vascular disease, hypertension, Alzheimer's disease, cancer, plaque buildup and blockage in the heart, causing heart attacks, fatty liver, PCOS, sleep apnea, chronic low-grade inflammation, and risk of clotting leading to strokes. The components of metabolic syndrome are high triglycerides, low HDL, central obesity, high blood pressure, high blood glucose. The conditions that are known as metabolic syndrome, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, and old age, are the same ones that have created bad outcomes for people who contracted the virus COVID-19. The underlying conditions for metabolic syndrome are insulin resistance and leptin resistance. These two happen simultaneously in most people. People with insulin resistance almost invariably also have leptin resistance. So let's look at both of these. Let's first go to insulin resistance. What is insulin? Insulin is a hormone that naturally circulates around the body, without which we would die. It is a key regulator of energy metabolism, and it is one of the fundamental hormones that promote fat accumulation and fat storage. Insulin facilitates the intake of glucose into body cells for energy. Without sufficient insulin, glucose builds up in the bloodstream, and that is what we see in the blood test: high blood sugar, high blood glucose. Now, what is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is when our body is resistant to the effects of insulin. The insulin that we are secreting is not working in the way it should, as well as it should. To understand the concept of resistance, I would recommend that you watch our video, What is Insulin Resistance, Part 1. In it, I explain the biological principle homeostasis with illustrations about smell, noise, and drug resistance, and finally, insulin resistance. Dr. Gerald Reaven in 1966 said that insulin resistance is a common root cause for diabetes, hypertension, and central obesity. Insulin resistance predisposes for cardiovascular disease. He said this as early as 1966. An AIIMS study states that Indians have a high prevalence of insulin resistance. The tendency to develop diabetes and early atherosclerosis, that is, blocks in the heart, are high for Indians. Even if BMI, body mass index, is within definition, abnormal obesity is present, and that is what should be considered importantly, more than BMI. The study also states that insulin resistance begins at a young age for Indians, and therefore prevention strategies should be started earlier. Since it starts at an earlier age, let's look at children and insulin resistance and the probability of future disease for them. Insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes is rapidly now becoming a major disorder of childhood and adolescence. There is a study that says that childhood type 2 diabetes doubled in the past year of COVID-19. There is a rapid rise in the prevalence of obesity in pediatric population. Childhood metabolic syndrome promotes the development of premature atherosclerosis and significantly increases cardiovascular disease risk early in life. The pathological processes and risk factors associated with the development of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and death have been shown to begin during childhood. There is a direct link between obesity and insulin resistance. There is a direct link between abnormal lipid profile and insulin resistance. Being overweight during childhood and adolescence is significantly associated with insulin resistance, abnormal lipids, and elevated pressure in young adulthood. Metabolic disorders in adulthood begin in childhood. The study was conducted among 7 to 13-year-old children. Insulin resistance develops during childhood and adolescence and can progress to type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease during young adulthood, contributing to increased morbidity and mortality. Fasting insulin levels in children predicted their blood pressure 6 years later. This is why we see children and teenagers who are becoming visibly fatter and fatter and are more prone to infections and diseases. And as early adults, they have type 2 diabetes and obesity, and then suddenly have heart attacks at 35 and 40 and 45 and sometimes even succumb to it. Let's look at the link between insulin resistance and heart disease. Dr. Joseph Kraft, the father of the insulin assay test, says that those with cardiovascular disease not identified with diabetes are simply undiagnosed. It means they have diabetes, but the diagnosis has not yet been made. Presence of higher insulin resistance could be a risk factor for carotid arteriosclerosis in subjects, even with normal fasting glucose and normal glucose tolerance. Insulin resistance was identified as an independent risk factor of cardiovascular disease, irrespective of other metabolic syndrome conditions. Let's look at more information about how insulin resistance has further and deeper effects than we think. Dr. Jason Fung, in his book Diabetes Code, has allocated an entire chapter titled The Whole Body Effect about the effect of diabetes. You may wonder why we're discussing about complications relating to diabetes. Hold on, wait, please continue to listen and you will understand the link between insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. When a person is first diagnosed with diabetes, nobody tells them that these are the possible complications that they may have to encounter later on in their life. They're assured, diabetes is normal, it can be treated, it can be managed. You just have to keep monitoring your blood sugar and then we'll take a look at medications and that's that. In the meanwhile, eat less and exercise more. And we know that that's not possible. You can look about information about that in our YouTube playlist about calories. Dr. Fung says that practically no organ system remains unaffected by diabetes. Complications arising due to diabetes are either microvascular or macrovascular. Microvascular complications are damages to small blood vessels supplying blood to the kidney, eyes and nerves. So the eye problems, also called as diabetic retinopathy, may in severe cases lead to blindness. Sometimes retinopathy develops several years even before diabetes is diagnosed. That is when the patient is still insulin resistant, but diabetes hasn't been diagnosed yet. Chronic kidney disease. Microvascular diabetic complications also lead to chronic kidney disease. The job of the kidney is to clean the blood. When it fails, toxins build up inside the body. Diabetic kidney disease, also known as nephropathy, is one of the leading causes of end-stage renal disease. Diabetic kidney disease takes about 15 to 25 years to develop, but sometimes, just like in diabetic retinopathy, it may be diagnosed even before type 2 diabetes. As the disease progresses, the patient requires dialysis for 3 to 4 hours, about 3 times a week till the end, or till they can get a kidney transplant. The other complication is diabetic nerve damage, also known as neuropathy. It affects approximately 60 to 70% of patients with diabetes. Peripheral nerves affecting the hands and feet may cause tingling, numbness, burning, and pain. An insulin-dependent relative of mine was prescribed foot cream for numbness. I thought that's like giving a small band-aid for a huge bone fracture. Anyway, another nerve disorder affects large muscle groups, also called diabetic amyotrophy, which causes severe pain and muscle weakness, particularly in the thighs. There may also be damage to the autonomous nervous system that controls our automatic body functions, breathing, digestion, sweating, and heart rate. If the nerves to the heart are affected, then there is a risk of silent heart attack and death. Now let's go to the macrovascular complications of diabetes. This is the large blood vessels. Atherosclerosis is when plaques of fatty material are deposited on the inner walls of blood vessels, causing a narrowing or a hardening of those blood vessels. Diabetes greatly increases the risk of developing atherosclerosis. Dr. Fung says that atherosclerosis is wrongly imagined as cholesterol slowly clogging the arteries. And people popularly give this illustration of sink drainage being clogged with fat. Dr. Fung goes on to explain in this book how atherosclerosis actually happens. I would recommend that you watch our video, Lies About Saturated Fat and Cholesterol. It's in our YouTube channel. It's a 17-minute extract from a documentary movie by Tom Norton called The Fat Head. Another complication is heart attack. The most well-recognized and feared complication of diabetes is heart attack, medically called as myocardial infarctions caused by atherosclerosis of the blood vessels supplying the heart. Stroke is caused by atherosclerosis of the large blood vessels supplying the brain. Normal flow of blood is disrupted and the brain is starved of oxygen. A portion of the brain may also die. This is called stroke. Diabetes is a strong independent risk factor in stroke. This means, independent risk factor means that diabetes on its own, if a person has just diabetes alone and no other complication, this person's risk of having a stroke is about 150 to 400%. Peripheral vascular disease is caused by atherosclerosis of the large blood vessels supplying the legs. The disruption of normal blood flow starves the leg of oxygen-carrying hemoglobin. This could lead to long-term disability. Skin with poor blood supply is damaged and it takes longer time to heal. In diabetics, minor cuts or injuries to the feet may become non-healing foot ulcers. Severe cases, the skin breaks down and may progress to gangrene. At this point, blood supply is almost completely lost the tissue dies, and this may lead to amputation. There are other complications that may arise due to diabetes. Alzheimer's disease, a chronic progressive neurodegenerative disease that causes memory loss, personality changes, and cognitive problems is one of them. It is a common form of dementia. The links between Alzheimer's disease and diabetes have grown so strong that many researchers suggest that Alzheimer's disease can be called type 3 diabetes. Cancer. Type 2 diabetes increases the risk of most cancers, including breast, stomach, colorectal, kidney, and endometrial cancers. The survival rate of cancer patients with pre-existing diabetes is far worse than for non-diabetics. If you're interested to know more about cancer, I would suggest the book Cancer Code by Dr. Jason Fung. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is defined as the storage and accumulation of excess fat in the liver. The incidence of fatty liver in type 2 diabetes is estimated at higher than 75%. There are skin and nail conditions that may arise as a complication of diabetes. Acanthosis nigricans is a black thickening of skin around neck and body folds, shin spots, and skin tags. Over 25% of patients with skin tags have diabetes. Skin tags reduce or disappear when people go on the low-carb, high-fat diet. Nail problems and fungal infections are common in patients with diabetes. Erectile dysfunction. Diabetes is a key risk factor, increasing the risk of erectile dysfunction more than 3-fold and afflicting patients at a younger age than usual. Poor blood circulation in diabetics is the likely reason for this increased risk. PCOS. PCOS is characterized by irregular periods and the presence of cysts in the ovaries. PCOS patients, that is polycystic ovarian syndrome. These patients share many characteristics as type 2 diabetics, which include obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and insulin resistance. PCOS increases the risk of developing type 2 diabetes 3 to 5 times in young women. Talking about PCOS, we see many testimonials of people who move to a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, conceiving within months of the diet, instead of taking medications which probably increase the incidence of multiple children. While mainstream medicine has focused on the lowering of blood glucose, the underlying root cause, that is insulin resistance, has not been addressed. If insulin resistance is addressed, then all the above complications that we now saw that arise from it can be prevented. Studies say that insulin resistance, not fat mass, is the key link between obesity and poor COVID-19 outcomes. Improving insulin sensitivity and lowering circulating insulin levels will result in better outcomes for people with COVID-19. That is, even if somebody contracts COVID-19, the health outcomes will be much better if they're able to reduce their insulin levels in the blood. So we've now seen that insulin resistance is one of the underlying root causes for metabolic syndrome, which includes diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and heart disease, also called as comorbidities of COVID-19. What is leptin? Leptin is a hormone linking adiposity and central nervous circuits to reduce appetite and enhance energy expenditure. In simple language, leptin is the satiety hormone. Satiety means you feel full after eating. So it sends a signal to the brain to turn down hunger and to increase the metabolism. It maintains fat storage at normal. It doesn't allow excess fat storage in the body. That's the role of the hormone leptin. Leptin resistance, similar to insulin resistance, is when our body becomes resistant to the effects of leptin. The leptin we secrete is not working as well as it should. To understand the concept of resistance, I would remind you to watch our video, What is Insulin Resistance, Part 1, where I explain the biological principle, homeostasis, and give you illustrations about smell, noise, and drug resistance, and then go on to explain insulin resistance. Now back to leptin. Leptin is recognized as an adipokine. Adipokine is a protein that sends signals to the cells. It is secreted by the fat tissue with proliferative mitogenic. In simple language, it means it increases in number rapidly by cell division. It is anti-apoptotic, that is, it prevents natural cell death, and pro-inflammatory, prone to inflammation. Leptin plays a role in the development of chronic diseases like obesity, cardiovascular disease, cancers, including cancer of the lungs, gastrointestinal, breast, ovarian, colorectal, and some other cancers. For all these, I give links to sources in the show notes or the video description. Hyperleptinemia, which is high levels of leptin in the blood. leads to blood pressure, pro-inflammatory effects, parasympathetic nervous activity. Aggravates cardiovascular functions, causing myocardial infarction, that is heart attack, stroke, calcification of the arteries, atherogenesis, it means formation of fatty deposits in the arteries, atherosclerosis, it means plaque buildup inside the arteries. Hyperleptinemia is an independent predictor of metabolic syndrome population in a study conducted in the adult population of Kerala, India. Obesity is associated with hyperleptinemia, metabolic syndrome, especially abdominal obesity and insulin resistance are associated with hyperleptinemia. Analysis of leptin as part of routine physical examination could be beneficial in the early diagnosis of metabolic syndrome. This study also says that the reduction of serum leptin levels may confer cardiovascular and metabolic protective effects. That is, if you reduce leptin in the blood, it gives benefits for heart health and metabolic health. Another study says leptin resistance may be pathophysiological for metabolic and cardiovascular dysfunction under obesity. Elevated plasma leptin levels or hyperleptinemia, like I told you, it's high levels of leptin in the blood, have been demonstrated to correlate with hyperphagia. It means abnormal hunger and excessive eating. Insulin resistance and markers of metabolic syndrome, including obesity and hyperlipidemia, that is high levels of fat in the blood, and hypertension, independent of total adiposity, independent of the fat mass of a person. Leptin resistance may cause all these problems. Elevated plasma leptin levels may act as a pathophysiological trigger and marker for cardiovascular disease due to tissue leptin resistance. Now let's go to obesity, fat mass and immune system, how it affects the immune system. Which is why we see experts telling us that obesity is one of the comorbidities of COVID-19 and they insist that people lose their weight. Innate immunity and adaptive immunity is compromised when leptin levels are high. Osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes are all indicated with high leptin levels. A study says that the hormone leptin has been shown to regulate the immune response, both innate and adaptive, both in normal and pathological conditions. Autoimmune diseases are associated with increased secretion of leptin and production of pro-inflammatory pathogenic cytokines. We've heard the term cytokines and cytokine storm when we hear about COVID-19. We'll go on to that later, but here it is. Leptin is responsible for the low-level systemic inflammation present in metabolic syndrome-associated chronic pathologies such as atherosclerosis, which is associated with obesity, especially central obesity. Let me remind you that the links to the sources that I'm citing are in the show notes or the video description. One particularly remarkable source is that of Dr. Ron Rosedale. I think you'll remember the media attention to the son of Ambani being obese and then how he lost weight. It was a remarkable transformation. Dr. Ron Rosedale, who has spoken much about COVID-19 and leptin resistance, the links of which I will attach, happens to be the consultant, the medical consultant of the family. Now, let's look at the connections between leptin resistance and COVID-19. Higher leptin levels affect both innate and adaptive immunity. Research says that elevated circulating leptin levels, that is hyperleptinemia, are correlated with an increased risk and severity of respiratory infection, regardless of body mass index. The association between obesity and elevated risk of pulmonary infection may be driven by hyperleptinemia. In the COVID situation, it is the innate immune system that is overreacting and causing the trouble, also called the cytokine storm. Innate immune system is also called the metabolic immune system. So if metabolic health is good, then your immune system is good. At the end of this video, we'll consult with Dr. Ellis Vivian about how to improve our metabolic health. Only 4 out of 10 patients who are on a ventilator will go home alive, says a UK report. We saw a bit of the definition about the leptin hormone at the beginning of this section. What we need to know is that leptin is also a cytokine. Cytokines are substances such as interferon, interleukin, and growth factors, which are secreted by certain cells of the immune system. Cytokines cause inflammation. We'll see later on how cytokines are good, but how come they end up causing damage? So cytokines cause inflammation, and a huge release of cytokines called cytokine storms. Now you've heard this term often during COVID-19. It results in death in most cases. IL-6, interleukin 6, is one of the major cytokines that mediates this massive inflammation. And one of the mediators of IL-6 is the hormone leptin. We already saw that people with insulin resistance almost always have leptin resistance. Leptin is produced mostly in fat tissues, especially in visceral fat. It is fat inside the body in the viscera. 99% of obese people have leptin resistance. Leptin resistance is present in the obese, diabetics, and hypertensive patients, and also the elderly. All these conditions are predisposed to COVID-19. They are called comorbidities. When it comes to COVID-19, we've heard doctors and experts tell us that we should improve our immune system. Now, leptin is intimately and integrally involved with the immune system. The main goal to achieve with any infection, including COVID, is to prevent the infection or to improve the outcome if you get the infection. For this, you need a strong, robust immune system. You cannot have a strong immune system if you have leptin resistance. Leptin influences every aspect of immunity. Leptin receptors are found both in innate and adaptive immunity, in monocytes, macrophages, natural killer cells, T cells, and every type of white blood cell is responsive to leptin. We've learned in high school the important role of white blood cells in the immune system. High leptin levels and leptin resistance are found in almost all autoimmune diseases like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and multiple sclerosis. NK cells, natural killer cells, which are the first line of defense against all infections, virus, bacteria, and cancer. When NK cells become leptin resistant and insulin resistant, they can't function properly. Leptin controls all aspects of the hypothalamus, including the sympathetic nervous system, which helps regulate the immune system. The sympathetic nervous system causes vasoconstriction and hypertension. Leptin and the hypothalamus help regulate the thymus, the thyroid, and reproduction. Dr. Ron Rosedale says, just measure the leptin. If it is high, bring it down. It will reduce the incident of the cytokine storm. People who are dying of COVID are dying as a result of the collateral damage of inflammation. Leptin resistance reduces the accuracy of the immune response. We'll see an illustration about this later on to help you understand clearly. The immune system then attacks not just the virus, but the other cells as well. Dr. Ron Rosedale says that there are two factors that mediate leptin. Fat. The more fat you already have in your body, the more leptin is produced. The second is food. Leptin production is affected by what we eat. Every single meal counts. If there are too much carbs or even a certain level of excessive protein, then there is a spike in leptin levels. Leptin response to a meal is independent of how fat a person already is. These spikes in leptin over time is what causes leptin resistance. It's a vicious cycle. You start storing fat. And because you're unable to access the stored fat, you secrete more leptin, you get hungrier, you eat, and you start storing more and more fat. Even though leptin spikes are not as rapid as insulin, it may take 12 hours, but insulin spikes are 2 to 4 hours. So if you want to change leptin levels, especially to reduce the incidence of a cytokine storm in a COVID situation, every meal changes the leptin levels. By changing what a person eats, the leptin levels can be brought down even in a day or so. Insulin levels may be brought down in a week or so. This is why Dr. Ron Rosedale recommends dietary changes to patients with COVID. We saw that leptin and insulin are closely interrelated. The chances of leptin resistance and insulin resistance for people with worst outcomes for COVID-19 is almost 100%. A very small percentage of other problems like excessive smoking or being born with an immune deficiency or people on chemotherapy, etc. are the other small percentage with worst outcomes for COVID. Leptin and insulin resistance are closely tied together and they work together. They are basically the same. Insulin will raise leptin and leptin will raise insulin. Leptin independently increases gluconeogenesis, that is the release of glucose by the liver. Leptin control can also be used as a treatment for diabetes. A study says that there is such close interrelation of leptin and insulin levels that one test can be used as a surrogate measure for the other. Now let's look a bit further into how leptin resistance and insulin resistance result in an impaired immune system and how this affects people with COVID. We already saw what resistance is, that body cells are unable to listen to the signals sent by leptin and insulin and they become resistant. These life-giving signals from insulin and leptin are unheard by the body because of all this bombardment and excess of insulin and leptin from eating high carbohydrate foods that have made a person insulin and leptin resistance. For example, if the liver is the organ that has become insulin resistant, then it means the liver can't hear insulin's message. Insulin is sending a message. It's a life-giving signal, but the liver is unable to hear it. Similarly, it happens to the rest of the body. And because the liver is unable to hear the message, it makes too much sugar. That is why diabetics have high fasting blood sugars. They've not eaten throughout the night. Still, they have high fasting blood sugars. Similarly with leptin. So the fine orchestration of life-giving signals within the body becomes impaired. These life-giving signals from insulin and leptin have become impaired because of the resistance, and this causes disease. Leptin resistance and insulin resistance impair the immune system. We've seen that white blood cells are critical to the immune system. They have leptin receptors. So leptin signals the white blood cells. But when the person's white blood cells cannot hear the leptin, the immune system is repaired. So they can't fight the infection well. Moreover, high leptin makes too much interleukin 6. We also must remember that leptin itself is a cytokine and it is highly inflammatory. So when leptin is high, the body is already inflamed. Its predisposition to make more IL-6 causes even more inflammation. This also raises blood sugar and this vicious cycle continues. So Dr. Ron Rosedale says to increase immunity, we need to get the body to burn fat instead of burning glucose. And for that to happen, leptin and insulin signaling has to go on smoothly. And if it has to go on smoothly, a person should not have leptin resistance or insulin resistance. They should be leptin sensitive and insulin sensitive. When the immune system is impaired, it is unable to respond accurately. So instead of just attacking the virus, it raises a storm called the cytokine storm and attacks many other healthy cells as well. COVID disease is the collateral damage that happens because of an impaired immune system. We already saw that inflammation is necessary. Inflammation is essential. Inflammation is necessary to fight infection, but it has to be controlled inflammation. Chronic inflammation means an impaired immune system. It has uncontrolled inflammation. Let me give you an illustration to help you understand this better. An impaired immune system is like a person without any firing skills. He takes a machine gun into the crowd and fires randomly. So innocent people, criminals, everybody gets killed or injured. A healthy immune system, a good immune system, is like a sniper. We've seen this in movies. A sniper takes aim even from a distance and kills a single target. So a healthy immune system does that. It attacks only the infection. However, an impaired immune system ends up attacking good cells. And that is what happens when a cytokine storm arises in a COVID situation. Dr. Rosedale says to have a controlled and well-functioning immune system, you need to have well-regulated leptin and insulin. And to have that good regulation, we need to eat the right foods. We have to eliminate ultra-processed food, refined grains, and factory seed oils. Just eat real foods. For example, we eat eggs. Eggs have cholesterol, and cholesterol is good. It is necessary for the immune system. However, people who have cholesterol-lowering drugs have impaired immune system. Cholesterol is an integral part of the cell membrane and it is essential for the manufacture of new cells and for a well-functioning immune system. To increase immunity, one needs a rapid multiplication of white blood cells. To improve white blood cell production, the body needs cholesterol. That is why immune response is slow for people who are on cholesterol-lowering drugs like statins. Another point is sugar itself impairs the immune system. While developing insulin and leptin resistance may take months and years, the response to sugar is immediate. The immune system responds immediately to sugar. The impairment is rapid. So Dr. Rosedale says the correction can also be rapid. He talks about COVID patients in hospitals being put on DW5, which is basically dextrose in water. It raises insulin. It also raises leptin. Therefore, it destroys the immune system further and further. That's not going to help the COVID patient at all. If they change the IV, he says to probably lactated ringers or certain other options, and if the diet of the patient is changed in the hospital to a low carbohydrate, high fat food, it could make a huge difference to the outcome of the patient. They could reduce their stay in the hospital and worse outcomes can be avoided. People who are at home with COVID can easily change their diet by reducing high carbohydrate foods and they can improve their immunity. People who want to avoid getting the COVID infection can also change the diet at home. Dr. Rosedale says the content of artificial feeding to ventilator patient, which is now high in sugar, if it is changed, it will lead to better outcomes in hospital patients with COVID. Low carb feeding content improves the blood sugar levels. Such patients may need an oxygen ventilator for a shorter duration of time than a patient on a high sugar and oxidized oil feeds. In talking about COVID and a change in food, Dr. Rosedale says whatever the weight of a patient is, eating a low carbohydrate, high fat and adequate protein meal offers protection and an increase in immunity. It is better to start now than when you find out that you have symptoms of COVID-19. And even if a person has COVID-19, it is better to start at some point while having the disease to improve the outcomes and to reduce or prevent a cytokine storm and overcome the infection easily and become healthier soon. So we have now seen how metabolic syndrome and comorbidities are essentially the same. And we've also seen that the underlying causes of these two are leptin resistance and insulin resistance. Now keep this aside. Let us look at COVID-19 alone. We've had continuous lockdowns in various parts of the world, especially in India. Let's consider that the whole world is locked down. So what is the coronavirus going to do? It will look and it will say, oh, the earth is locked down, let me go to another planet. Is it? No. The virus is around and it's here to stay. So what do we do? One answer is the vaccine. But what? If, like some experts say, the coronavirus is seasonal. We've seen 2 surges and 2 lockdowns in India, both in March, April of 2020 and 2021. So maybe the surge happens around the same time in this part of the world. Flu viruses are seasonal and they change in different parts of the world. So some experts like Dr. Beda Stadler, who's known as the vaccine pope, say that this coronavirus could be seasonal, in which case it doesn't make sense to name it as first wave and second wave and third wave. The influenza virus comes every season. So what is it now? The 10,000th wave, the 22,000th wave? We don't call them waves. It's just seasonal. So what if the coronavirus flu also is seasonal? So what happens at the next season? Is a question he raises. The answer to that may be the vaccine. So we get the vaccine and that's it. We will not get the coronavirus again. Suppose we say that. Okay, fine. What about another virus that may come after 2-3 years? Well, speaking about viruses, we saw all the flu-like viruses of the past century. So what if after 3 or 5 years, another virus comes? We'll name it Coronavirus 2027 or whatever. What will we do then? Again, will we shut down the whole world like this for years on end? 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, affecting the livelihoods of people, affecting the health of people, affecting the normal life of people, leading to deaths due to various other causes because people are not able to access hospitalization. Are we going to do this when another virus comes? What can we do? Can we do something? First of all, yes, we can. We can improve our metabolic health. Dr. Beda Stadler says, it is a virus. All it needs is a host. It doesn't have a personal agenda to kill the human being on whom it is a host. So I understand this as it just needs a place to live. The host, us, if we are so weak, then we die due to other complications that arise due to this virus. The virus itself is not out to kill people. So how can we become healthier so that the virus doesn't result in death? I'm not calling the virus good or bad and all that. It's an organism which needs to survive. But as people, as human beings, what can we do to improve our immune system and our health so well that such a virus will not cause a major problem like it has, such that it will not be classified as a pandemic or an epidemic, but will go like the common flu. Like the common cold. You get it, you sniffle for 2 days, you have a runny nose, and the 5th day you're fine, you go to work, you lead a normal life. Or you don't get it at all. Dr. Stadler even says, what is this term called asymptomatic? You either have it or you don't have it. There's nothing called asymptomatic. Now, in a room full of people, somebody gets the cold, somebody doesn't. We had an office of 10 people. There were a couple of people. Every year, they will get the cold. And some of others of us who were younger or healthier, like I was much older, but my husband and I, we always had LCHF food, so our immunity was much higher. We never got the cold. But this person will get the cold every single season. What is the difference between him and me? The immune system is healthier. So I didn't say I had asymptomatic cold. I just thought I didn't get the cold, he got the cold. That's all. Similarly, with corona, it need not be asymptomatic COVID-19 and symptomatic COVID-19. Somebody got COVID-19, somebody didn't get COVID-19. Okay, so how about the test that says it is positive? When a virus affects the system, the immune system fights. And when the immune system fights and the virus dies, you don't have the flu. You don't have the cold. But when you take a test, however, there will be traces of the dead flu virus. That may not necessarily mean that the person was affected by the virus. But we are now calling it asymptomatic. Previously, it just meant somebody had the flu, somebody didn't have the flu. So he says almost everyone is going to test positive at some point in time. And majority of the people may not even have symptoms because they have a strong immune system. So how about the others? How about people with a weaker immune system? And because those numbers are now high, there is a pandemic. And there are very bad outcomes, worst outcomes and death. So how can we prevent this? A vaccine may be like a band-aid. It may cure the problem now. But it is not going to cure a person's metabolic syndrome, which includes a person's obesity, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension. No, that depends on the individual and what they eat. Now, how can we improve this? First of all, how can we know if we are healthy? Because at the start of this video, I spoke about 4 stories, of which 2 were non-COVID related deaths. We see more and more of these deaths. I've seen it in the past 7 to 10 years. I've written a blog about it, which I shall link in the show notes, where I've seen people within the age of 40 suddenly getting a heart attack and sometimes dying from it, leaving behind loved family members alone in the world. And they're like, oh, we didn't know this person had a heart disease, but he suddenly died of a heart attack. So how can we know whether we have heart disease in the first place or any disease that could cause sudden death? How can we know what are the tests that we should take? And how can we improve our health? For this section, let us talk to Dr. Ellis Vivian and get his expert advice.